Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to this important and timely Community Land Trust Roundtable hosted by the Schumacher Center for New Economics. My name is Greg Watson. I'm the Director of Policy and Systems Design at the Center, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Our mission at Schumacher is to envision a just and regenerative economy, apply concepts locally, and then share the results for broad replication. Today's roundtable is one of the ways that we meet our mission. Founded in 1980, the Schumacher Center for New Economics works to envision the elements of a just and regenerative global economy, undertakes to apply these elements in its home region of the Berkshires and Western Massachusetts, and then develops educational programs to share the results more broadly, thus encouraging replication. We believe that a fair and sustainable economy is possible and that citizens working for the common interest can build systems to achieve it. We believe that our natural commons are best held by the regional community. We believe that money issue can be democratized, and we believe that ownership should be more diversified and that labor should have a part in the ownership structure. We're extremely fortunate to have three outstanding community land trust practitioners with us to share their diverse experiences, ideas, and visions this afternoon. Çaca Yvaire from the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, Tony Hernandez from the Dudley Neighbors Incorporated, and Janelle Orsi from the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And we will be hearing more from them very shortly. I've asked them to describe their work and to build on one of the major threads of George Monbiot's keynote that he delivered at the 40th Annual Schumacher Lecture in October. There he called for a new narrative about land, that each person hold only as much land as is adequate for household needs, and that each corporation use only what is necessary to conduct its activities. Excess land would be held and maintained by self-governed neighborhood groups for parks, public gathering spaces, recreational sites, and community gardens, and other as chosen by the community, thereby creating a public luxury amidst the private sufficiency. So he coined the term private sufficiency, public luxury to capture this idea. We must face the reality, a problematic concept in the past 4 years, that our resourceful, finite, and beautiful home planet simply cannot accommodate current patterns of private land ownership spurred by the false promise of the American dream. In the United States, the top 100 landowners taken together own as much land as the entire state of Florida. Since 2007, the amount of American land owned by these wealthy 100 has increased by 50% and is showing no signs of slowing down. This according to Simon Winchester in his new book, Land, How Hunger for Ownership Shaped the Modern World. America's top 5 farmland owners hold 959,000 acres, according to 2020 land report. Leading the list are Bill and Melinda Gates with 269,000 acres across 19 states. By way of comparison, the nation's 44,629 Black farmers operate a total of 3.6 million acres, according to the 2012 Census of Agriculture. So the top 5 are just under a third. It's just amazing, right? Of the land owned by over 44,000 Black farmers. Meanwhile, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, farms run by African Americans make up less than 2% of all the nation's farms today, down from 14% in 1920 because of decades of racial violence and unfair lending and land ownership policies. Schumacher Center is proposing a campaign to encourage gifting working lands into community land trusts and other forms of common ownership to expand access to land for populations excluded from ownership of community ownership. I've asked each one of our distinguished panelists to discuss their work in the context of land access and to specifically gifted land. Çaca, Tony, and Janelle will speak for 10 minutes each in that order. Then they will ask questions of each other for 10 minutes, and I will follow with a couple of questions, and we'll take questions from all of you. Lastly, we felt that we can't talk about land without recognizing indigenous peoples and cultures from whom this land was stolen. I would ask that each of us identify the territory where we currently are and comment briefly on its original peoples. I'll begin. Schumacher Center for New Economics sits on ancestral lands of the Mohegan. The land is now called the Berkshires, that we now call the Berkshires, was originally inhabited by Mohegan people who were forcefully removed from the land and relocated through New York, Indiana, and ultimately Wisconsin. Today, they are known as Stockbridge Muncie Community Band of Mohegan Indians, a federally recognized tribal nation. The term Mohikaniok and its English spelling and pronunciation, Mohegan, means people of the waters that are never still. The Mohegans and Algonquin tribe was a dominant Native American group along the Hudson River before the arrival of Europeans early in the 17th century. European diseases and warfare with neighboring Mohawks for control of the fur trade soon decimated the Mohegans and reduced their numbers by an estimated 90%. The surviving members of the tribe became widely dispersed throughout the Northeast and Canada, with one small group settling in what is now known as Berkshire County in Western Massachusetts and called Stockbridge Mohegans or Stockbridge Indians. After the Revolution, colonial settlers forced the tribe from their land, and Stockbridge Mohegan Indians retreated to Oneida Territory in New York, where at the invitation of the Oneida tribe, with increasing colonial pressures, they were pushed further west to Indiana and then to Wisconsin. Today, they are known as the Stockbridge Muncie Community Band of Mohegans. With that, it is now my pleasure to introduce Çaca Yvaire from the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. Çaca is the Terran Shield Community Conservation Co-Director for the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. He is an Afro-Indigenous territorial scholar practitioner and student of planetary science, political geoecology, and the arts. He is primarily invested in stimulating and uplifting an infrastructure that supports a rich and imaginative solidarity between lifeways and honoring the varied traditions of relating sustainability in the world around us through non-industrial agroecology, agriculture, silviculture, aquaculture that have been historically sidelined by imperialist design. Çaca, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Greg. You told everyone. I want to give all my love to the peoples caring and fighting for the ancestors and the generations preparing to spirit Narragansett and Wampanoag lands. That is the territory where my voice and image are being transmitted to your screen and audio devices today. The question regarding land gifting is special to our organization. Hopefully it's special to everyone listening. In order to build up to that, to responding directly to it, I want to give a little bit of a basic understanding of where we're coming from. So Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust is a complex project aimed at advancing land sovereignty. That's not something that we take lightly. We're aiming for a complete transformation of the ways in which we relate to all beings in any present ecological community. As a community conservation co-director, I'm working to shift the ways in which we organize communities and the relationships over time. So we're absolutely talking about intergenerational long-term work, which I think echoes some of the points made by George. We're talking work that will not manifest in spoils for today, but in plenty and liberation tomorrow and always. That's the gift that we are offering, and so we wish to trade in gifts. Currently, when we are presented with a gift of land, our process is unique to each one of those gifts. Our process is determined through our Indigenous consultation and partnerships. Our process then transitions to a conversation around what is need, what are the proximity, what sorts of relationships need to be sustained, which is generally the space in which I begin to work. Fortunately, we're seeing a great many people approach us with gifts and what we might refer to as like a pre-baked project, rather than direct financial donations. So in this way, we anticipate that we'll have the opportunity to articulate something different about what our gift might be. I want to quote my co-director, Stephanie Morningstar, who currently runs the Relationships, Resources, and Reciprocity program. We are challenging the resilience mindset that we need to continue building resilience to adapt to violent colonial systems that demand our continued bending to fit into those structures. In order to do this, we need to approach things outside that colonial system, which indigenizes the process. We're cyclical, nonlinear, and non-hierarchical because that's what worked for our ancestors. We're not just working together, we're working with our ancestors and the land. We're solidly advancing the for us, by us model. Anyway, Steph, thanks for that. I asked, or I offered that bit from Stephanie because currently, the way in which we've been approached through gifting has typically been a frustrating experience at times, because there is a desire to see us invest in someone else's vision, and particularly a vision that sustains a colonial mentality and a colonial and imperialist imaginary, and ultimately seeks to reify property and ownership of land. But we're challenging that. We're challenging that. That's the gift. I want to also speak to the intergenerational bit, because I feel like that's where we are in this pandemic moment, where we're really struggling to think through what it is that we're inheriting and what it is that we might pass down. And I think the work that I do as a practitioner within the Land Trust specifically is I seek to ensure that whatever it is that we pass down is not something crafted or heavily influenced by the institutional framework in which it is being delivered, it is being offered. So when I step into a space, I bring with me values that emerged from my relationships that were not forged within the institutional space of the nonprofit or the industry that is the nonprofit industrial complex, right? Or the complex that is the nonprofit industry. So in this way, when we meet someone who presents a gift to us, a gift of land, we are truly, truly, truly trying to offer ourselves in response. We are forging relationships first, and then we are siphoning through our relationships in order to determine what is done with the land that's being offered as a gift. I'm going to quote another one of my co-directors, Gabby Pereira, and then I'm going to wrap this bit up. But Gabby shared with me this morning that a future that reflects actions originating in community values should never be hierarchical. I want for everyone who may be listening or may review this later to really take that to heart. Because otherwise, what sort of gift are you offering?
All right. Next up, thank you again, Çaca. Tony Hernandez from the Dudley Neighbors Inc. is next up, and Tony is the director for the Dudley Neighbors Incorporated, the community land trust established by the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, DSNI, in Roxbury, Mass. Dudley Neighbors Incorporated has been promoting the community land trust model, as well as building towards what now spans over 32 acres of land over 30 years throughout the Roxbury and North Dorchester area of Boston. Tony has led in advancing DSNI's mission and the organization's work to reclaim brownfields in the community. And again, one of the most underrated organizations, and that's a biased opinion, operating in the country today. Tony?
Appreciate you, Greg. Thank you. So folks, a pleasure to be before all of you today. I can't see all of you, but I pray that you are all well, especially in the midst of this pandemic, and that you and your loved ones are well in this moment, that you're setting aside to listen to us talk about some of the work that we do. Um, Before I move on to talk about Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative and Dudley Neighbors Incorporated, the Community Land Trust, I did want to pay respects, and do the land recognition and acknowledging that, there's been human activity here in Massachusetts now for, well over 13,000 years. In this territory of Massachusetts, and our neighbors, we give credit to the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples, who have stewarded this land for generations. And so I want to express that land recognition to folks that have stewarded this land for us. And today it serves thousands of indigenous people, to allow us to continue to do the work that we do and that I will present to you shortly. So my respects and my land recognition acknowledgement. Um, my name is Tony Hernandez. I serve as the managing director for Dudley Neighbors Incorporated. It is a community land trust, and I'll walk you folks through a number of visuals that'll show some of our sites. Um, myself, I was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. I grew up in the tough neighborhood of Roxbury. Um, I like to tell folks that I picked up street smarts before I learned book smarts. And I'm proud of that because, doing this kind of work, you got to have a level of thick skin to be able to fight for things that sometimes people just aren't given. So you've got to be able to raise your voice and speak to those things. Born and raised in Boston, studied here. I have my master's in architecture. I practiced architecture for about 13 years before I made the leap over to this nonprofit world. And here I am 7 years later serving this organization, known as Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. They've got a 37-year track record of serving community that, 35 plus years ago was an underserved neighborhood, and became this powerhouse of an organization that was led by the people, for the people, for now 37 years in its existence. And it came as a result of underinvestment in our neighborhoods. There was fire for arson in our neighborhood. There were illegal trash transfer stations, and folks were being kicked out of the neighborhood because they simply couldn't afford to stay. And so this group of incredible predecessors of mine, blazed this trail to lead us to where we are today. Um, and I wanted to make sure to capture a number of visuals in the 10 minutes that I have to present. And I'm happy to answer questions, but I wanted to show off the things that have happened over the 30 plus years. So if I may, I want to do a screen share. And as I narrate through it, I will, show you folks the visuals. Um, as you can see here, we've got, here's our logo, Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. Uh, in concept, right, the ABCs of a community land trust are that, we, as an organization, right, we own the land, we continue to own the land while we build things on top of that land. And the thing that marries the home to the land, the covenant that brings the two together, is a ground lease that we strike with our homeowners, and they lease out the land for the next 99 years, while DNI continues to be the owner of the land. And the model is designed to forever own the land so that we can preserve affordability of the properties that sit on this land, and so that gentrification cannot sink its ugly teeth into claiming land that it can then overcharge, and our people can't afford to stay in the neighborhood. So it removes gentrification and speculation out of the equation so that we can preserve what we have. So those are pretty much the ABCs of how the land trust model works. As Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative grew and the residents were the ones that were controlling the evolution of what happened in this neighborhood, um, we were able to get control over 1,300 empty parcels of land as a result of the fight that residents took to the city back in the early 1980s. DSNI established back in 1984. And so as a result of that fight with the city, they were able to get eminent domain over control over parcels of land. And I have some visuals for folks to check out that speak to the way things looked then. This is what Dudley, a portion of Dudley looked like. Let me check 1 second here. Looked back in 1987. And this is what that site looks like today. Back in 2015, we took a picture of the same street. I'll go back momentarily for the dramatic effect of this change. As you can see, it was underinvested, and when you drove through this neighborhood, it didn't look nice. And so folks really didn't care to drive through. And now we're fighting folks off because they see the opportunity that exists in being able to develop. And this is a result of community organizing and the ability to have community voice to determine what we bring to our sites. This is another site that existed back in the Dudley area. If you notice the triple yellow triple decker off in the distance. Today, this is what this site looks like. All around this park, we have community land trust homes that we were able to build. And as a result, the city then took this site and turned it into a beautiful park with a sprinkler system for the kids to get wet. And just behind this photo, there's a playground that they built for them. But all of it was influenced by the work that Dudley was able to do through the community land trust work. Here we have another site that you drove through back in the day, barren land. And today we've been able to produce housing. A lot of these homes along this perimeter of the same street are community land trust homes owned by folks that had the opportunity to afford these properties. As Mr. Watson mentioned earlier, the portfolio that I'm in charge of managing today exceeds 30 acres, and all the colored blocks that you see on the map are an indication of what were once parcels of land that were empty. Now houses sit on them, farms sit on them, playgrounds sit on them. And so my charge, as I like to consider myself, to being the gatekeeper to managing the portfolio, stewarding the portfolio in the best way possible, but also finding opportunities to grow the portfolio. This is a property that we own on Dudley Street. Currently, we have a flower shop that operates out of the first floor, I'm sorry. And then out of the second floor, we have office spaces. But we outright own the home, and we're able to produce opportunities for folks that want to start businesses. We have a flower shop that has run out of this property now for well over 10 years. This is one of our sites that we're looking to build a mixed-use commercial building on. That we were able to get from the city as they look to put out parcels of land that they want to get off of their books. They found an opportunity in giving those parcels of land over to Dudley because they've seen the track record that we've produced in trying to build things that are for the community, that are affordable, that are sustainable. So this is a 14,000 square foot site that I'm currently working with a developer on to figure out how we align the finances to build something that will not only occupy the space, that will serve the community. We have a 10,000 square foot greenhouse in our portfolio, managed by a great organization known as the Food Project. They do wonderful work. They employ youth. We have a lot of folks from the neighborhood who come from different parts of the world. And where they grew up, they didn't learn about technology, they learned about farming. And so this greenhouse grants them an opportunity to have a garden bed that they can grow things on year round. And so I show off this greenhouse every time we do tours in the neighborhood. If you're ever around, find me and I'll be happy to walk you around. One of our last homes built on the land trust about 3 years ago at this point is the one that you're looking at on your screen. There's a beautiful Ethiopian family that bought this home. And what I love about the collaboration on this property was that it was a collaborative partnership between multiple entities. While D&I owned the land, we granted a construction ground lease over to an organization known as Youth Build Boston. Youth Build Boston teamed up with Madison Vocational High School, right, where there are students looking to learn the tricks of the trade in carpentry and in that level of industry. Youth Build Boston trains apprentices in the same field, and they partnered with the local carpenters union to bring on the veteran experience to literally build this home. Um, and then also through a partnership with the city of Boston, who provided dollars to subsidize the cost of the home to make it more affordable for the family that was buying it. So a beautiful partnership between a number of partners to bring affordability. And as I like to say, right, it's great to bring quantity, but let's not forget to bring quality to our neighborhoods as well. It isn't necessarily a race about how many homes we can build. Let's assure that while we're building them, that the quality that our families deserve is also embedded in that equation. We have playgrounds on our land trust. As you can see in the aerial on the upper right, we could easily fit probably 2 homes on this site. But at the time, the organization decided that we needed to, right? Everything isn't about dropping the home on it. There are other amenities that serve the community. And so this site was dedicated for children. We had a grant from a grant through Kaboom that allowed us to build this playground, and we needed a site. And lo and behold, we had parcels of land at our disposal that we took advantage of and built this beautiful playground that still exists today. I walk by it often, and it's just a place for children to escape to from the inner city activities and to have a safe space to be in. We have a 1.5 acre farm known as the West Cottage Farm. On the upper left, it's an aerial of what the farm looks like. It's made up of 12 parcels of land, and we sold them all together and leased it out to the organization known as the Food Project, who have been farming on this site for now, my gosh, close to 20 years. And on the lower right, you see kind of a street view of what the farm looks like. They employ youth. And so as you walk by, it's pretty awesome to see youth engaged in agricultural activity. Not so much on a farm, but as I do the tours, I make folks pause for a moment and help them realize that they're standing on a farm in the middle of the city. In the middle of the city, they're standing on a 1.5 acre farm where you're able to produce, grow produce locally, right? And show youth, the agricultural skill sets necessary to do this. So it's a powerful testament to the amenities that the community has decided that they want to see in our neighborhood. One of the bigger items on my radar now is this, as you look at this view, the building that's circled is formerly formerly a bank that D&I was able to acquire about 3 years ago. And I've been putting this building with my team and the staff through the ringer that infuses community all throughout. We've had multiple community meetings that have spoken to us and said, what do you want to see happen with this site, when we develop it to take it to that next level? There's currently an RFP out, a request for proposal that we have out throughout Boston now, and developers are, as I speak now, probably developing proposals that are due mid-March. And I've built a steering committee of community members that will help me filter through these proposals to determine what happens with this site a number of years from now. When it's all said and done, will this place serve the community and bring benefit to those that live here locally? And again, it stays in the same vein of the mission and values that DS&I has been about since its birth. And so my charge is to assure that those values remain. I had an MIT grad student a number of years ago want to dedicate his thesis to working on the land trust, and he couldn't put his finger on what to focus on. And I asked him, I said, Lee, could you focus on foreclosures in our neighborhood? I want to know, right, what impact our community land trust model has potentially had. And this is the money shot view that I use to show folks. And I'll sum it up with by reading the paragraph on the right, in that in total, over a 2.5 mile radius from where we are as an office, he went back as far as 21 years, from 1993 through 2014. He was able to get data to acknowledge that there were 494 foreclosures over that span of land. And as you dwindle down into the grayish area, that represents the catchment area that DSNI serves as a community organization. And within that catchment area, the foreclosures dwindled down to 365. What we call today the Dudley Triangle, which represents where a majority of the portfolio that I manage exists, that number dwindled down to 22. And of course, the $1 million question was, how many of our actual land trust homes were impacted by foreclosure over a 21-year period? I wish I could tell you the number was 0, but we had 4. We had 4 over a 21-year period, not due to us not reaching out to homeowners, but some homeowners that were a little too prideful to accept help. Nonetheless, we reached out in a number of ways to try to help them save their homes. And when you run the numbers, you look at 494 foreclosures over a 21-year period, and how many of those homes represent actual community land trust homes. That represents the 0.081% of those properties. And during the foreclosure crisis, there were 0 foreclosures on our land trust. And so this data doesn't prove for a fact that community land trusts have power to prevent these things, but it makes a hell of an argument when you can show data like this to talk about the power and testament of what the community land trust model can do to a neighborhood. And I wrap it up with this slide where it's kind of a snapshot of where we are today. We currently have 97 single family homes, similar to the one I showed you earlier. 130 affordable rental units. We have the 10,000 square foot greenhouse I showed you. We have multiple farms. I showed you the largest one on our slides. Multiple community gardens. The former bank building that I gave you a view of. The big space that we're looking to build a new building on, the 14,000 square foot site. We have 16 units of housing forthcoming on the land trust, assuming we can rid of COVID, hopefully forever, we can get those projects back up and running. And of course, the most important thing is the hundreds of families, the thousands of community members that we've had the ability to be able to serve over the 30+ years that we've existed here. I'd need another hour, folks, to really dive in, but maybe throughout the questions and answer period, I'd be happy to dive into specifics. I really hope that this gives you a good snapshot of who we are today here in Dudley.
It is, Tony, a great job, and you have generated a number of questions that we will get to shortly after we hear from Janelle Orsi from the Sustainable Economies Law Center. Janelle is a cartoonist, dear to my heart, lawyer and advocate focused on cooperatives, land trust, housing justice, community-owned energy, and democratizing finance. She co-founded and works for the cooperatively structured nonprofit Sustainable Economies Law Center. Most of her time is spent learning and creating with inspiring groups who are advancing permanent community stewardship. Let me just do that. And you should check out her Radical Real Estate Law School and channeling investments, especially retirement savings, away from Wall Street and into our local communities. Janelle?
Hello, everybody. So I'll start by mentioning that I'm visiting my dad right now in Oregon on the ancestral lands of the Coquel people. And this actually used to be a reservation, and then due to a violation of a treaty, it no longer is. So that's where I am. I'm going to just dive in. I won't tell my whole backstory, but long story short, I became a lawyer 13 years ago, and I decided to focus on sharing and cooperatives. I started my own law practice and started inviting co-ops and co-housing communities and community gardens to be my clients. And I've advised a lot of land and housing projects over the years. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a timeline of how it's gone. So there was like a kind of a short period at the beginning where I think I just made my clients uncomfortable a lot. I'll explain why. Then there was a long period of time where my clients were making me uncomfortable. And now things are going well. Things are flowing. So that is the good news. But here's how it went early on, which is that clients would come to me and they're going to form a housing cooperative, which is exactly what I was excited to support. But then as soon as we started getting into the details, I'd have to bring up the law. And, they talk about pooling money. So I have to bring up this gray cloud of information called securities law. They talk about sharing ownership. So, oh, here comes subdivision law. And then they all want to live together, which a lot of times brings up zoning law. And they probably all wish that they'd never talked to me to begin with. And I was also thinking like, wait, does the law not want people to share and cooperate? I got this suspicion along the way that something about our society is not meant for cooperation, our legal system. So that's kind of how Sustainable Economies Law Center came about. I co-founded it in 2009. And early on, a lot of what we did is just create resources and advocate for policies. And we have made some headway in just making things easier for people through creating models and reducing some of the legal barriers. And so we did that, but also started giving legal advice to grassroots groups and co-ops in our communities. And we've now advised 1,600, both on their legal and policy projects. And during this period, we would get a lot of people coming in talking about like collective land purchases or collective housing purchases. And after a while, I started to kind of get a funny feeling in my stomach because of the way that people would come and they talk about it. And what it was, it took me a long time to figure this out, is that they were planning for an end game where they sell off this property and divide up the proceeds, which they would often be aiming to make a profit. And then there was also this weirdness of like, if one person puts in more money, they think they're entitled to more of the profits or more of the power and control. And they would ask me to come up with like a legal document that would be fair. And I was, becoming increasingly aware of how unfair the distribution of resources in our society is to begin with. So what was fair? It just sort of took me a long time to recognize why this was challenging for me. But now things are happening. It's involving a lot of people. And I'll start to explain what that is. So a lot of our clients now are land projects. A lot of them are BIPOC-led, Black and Indigenous-led groups who are acquiring land. And whether they call it a land trust or a real estate cooperative or something else, that part doesn't actually matter so much. But the things that are really mattering is that they're permanently removing real estate from the speculative market. So they're not expecting to sell it and get a profit someday. It's just here to stay. It's being stewarded by non-hierarchical collectives, meaning everybody's able to kind of exercise their agency and affection for the place and steward it. And then it's also very broadly oriented in a way that's engaging the broader community to be on the land and share its benefits. And just in the last couple of years, we've had so many groups reach out to us. We do a lot of advising in California, though some nationally, but what I picture is this map of California where these beautiful projects are starting to sprout up and really take root, like they have land now. And they're just projects that'll take your breath away. It's exactly the world that I want to live in. And if you can imagine yourself, I imagine this is happening in many communities. These projects are starting to take root. And if you participate in creating them, you're also going to just find yourself in a relationship with a growing network of really wonderful land projects that will, in theory, be there permanently throughout your life. And of course, as these grow, many of them are connected to each other because so many people have been involved, and so far it's a small community. And I think that's also it's growing people's confidence because it makes us more resilient in numbers. And in California, it's not a question of whether some projects are going to burn. They probably will burn. But these projects are in community with each other, and I think the support is going to flow among them if catastrophe strikes. So what is it that's making it work now? Where are these groups getting, I was going to say off the ground, but they're getting on the ground now. So some of it is just a lot of people have been involved, and sometimes you get a lot of people involved in a long-term project. It fizzles out because people burn out. But a lot of times what I'm finding is the groups just have a different kind of a relationship with each other. Like they're coming together around joy and love and building community, not around wealth accumulation. And that fuels them for, in some cases, the many years that it takes to get projects on the ground. And then many of them, truthfully, would not be possible if there hadn't been substantial acts of wealth redistribution. So an individual gifted a $1.5 million house to East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. There are foundations now that are making very large grants, sometimes many multiple year grants with few strings attached to groups that practically have no track record. So people are getting the resources now to do so. So these are pretty radical acts that hopefully will start to become the norm. So all of these seeds are getting planted. We're providing legal support to them, but also now that they're on the ground, other groups are like, oh, we can do that too. And so it's planting the seeds for other groups to want to do similar projects. And so that's just where all of us come in, because each of these projects takes so much community support, and everybody here needs to be part of it. So Sustainable Economies Law Center, we've been part of it by doing a lot of the legal support for it. But when we saw this coming, we started to see a lot more land projects reach out to us. In fact, I advised 3 just on Tuesday afternoon that I had not even heard of before. So we created the Radical Real Estate Law School because we recognize we really need to scale up the legal support for these projects. We hired these 4 amazing activists. They're becoming lawyers without going to law school by studying with us, which is possible in California and 3 other states. They're learning, they're teaching what they're learning, they're working with our clients. It's just wonderful. And the thing about the work is I just have boundless energy for it now because it's so creative and connecting and joyful, because the clients are like that. Like they're coming, they're transforming their relationships to land and to each other. And it's transforming the lawyers' relationships to clients. And we're just trying to rethink everything, like question the norm of the real estate sector, like question every part of it and do something different. So we're having the time of our lives. And I kind of wish we could grow the Radical Real Estate Law School by 1,000. I don't know how to do that, but that's where I think all the other folks here come in. And we also need movement and infrastructure. We've been supporting what I might call like medium-sized organizations that can serve as backbones. So when these grassroots groups have a spark of idea of like, let's buy this building or this land, they can go to other organizations in the community that are set up to be larger conduits of financial resources that can take title and anchor title like land trusts. So we've been focusing on some of these, and East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is one we've been involved in for a number of years. And so they have a handful of projects, real estate projects now in Oakland, and each of which is being organized by and then going to be stewarded by different groups of community members. So it's not really a top-down project. They're sort of like the backbone of support for these projects sprouting from the grassroots. And we also just help them do the legal compliance to do a national securities offering under Regulation A. And so in just a few weeks, they're going to be accepting investments from people in many different US states and paying, aiming to pay around a 1.5% return on those investments. So it's radically reducing the cost of capital, which helps reduce the cost of real estate. But there's still blockages, even with all of the progress we're making. And I want to say the good news about those blockages, I think this is good news, is that many of those blockages are just inside us, which means we have some control over them. And I want to give you an example of a project where I'm seeing these kinds of blockages, which is Black Yard. So this is a group of Black and queer artists on a kind of a unique property in Oakland. And it's for many years or even decades, it's been used as a hub of gathering for Black artists. It even had a restaurant. It was like a dance venue. So it's got history. And the residents now have this vision to create Black Yard, live there, but also cultivate it as a space for artists and residents, community events. They're going to be putting in a community garden. But the problem is they're renters right now. So they don't actually control and own the land. Not only that, as artists who've recently lost their gigs due to COVID, they're barely even able to make rent. So this is a GoFundMe that they just launched this week or this morning. And so they're just trying to raise rent. And I did put the link in the chat because I have a feeling that some of you all might be moved to give to them, because my hope for them is that they can raise all this money in one day and then just get on with creating Black Yard. But here's the situation. I guess the question is the landlord going to let them buy and own this property? Because that's their hope. But here, the situation is there's a couple that owns it. They don't live in Oakland. They do live in this nice house on a hill. So they seem fairly well off. And they've talked about this property as their son's nest egg. And so I've been like contemplating, what do they mean son's nest egg? What are they going to do? And I think, like everybody else, they probably subscribe to or are part of the cult of the fair market value, meaning they think it is fair to get market value by selling this property, which is probably what they're planning to do. I don't think their son is going to live there. They're going to convert it into cash. But meanwhile, what are the backyard residents doing? They're creating a wonderful, valuable community by creating this cultural flourishing in the neighborhood. They're working, earning money, but paying almost all of that money to rent right now so that the owners can continue to hold this before they sell it for fair market value. And so it started to feel like I started to recognize this is kind of like, it should kind of chill us to the bones to think of this, but how is this form of property ownership not a modern day reproduction of slavery? It's just people working, and their labor is basically ultimately going to support this family for their son's nest egg. So nest egg, I've been contemplating, what does this word mean? In part because we started a project called The Next Egg, which is about channeling retirement resources out of Wall Street, because there's about $30 trillion of retirement savings there, into projects that we care about, basically letting our nest eggs follow our hearts to create the worlds we want to live in. But what most people do is they intend for their nest eggs to grow, and the cash should grow. And so typically it just goes off to Wall Street. And most people have very few other options other than Wall Street. So how do we start to address the kind of blockages that are keeping us in this frame of mind of feeling like we need a nest egg? And so I've started to think of these two things, hierarchy and accumulation, as a kind of a poison that we're addicted to, because they kind of give us the delusion that we're important and that we're secure. And you kind of have to look at them together, because hierarchy justifies unequal accumulation, and unequal accumulation is what leverages power for people. And it's sort of like this endless cycle. But it's delusional. We think that we have to earn our respect by moving up in hierarchies. We think that we deserve security by accumulating large amounts of wealth. And it's all based on this lie, because society has not let us know the truth of our existence, which is that everybody deserves respect and everyone deserves security. But meanwhile, we're stuck, sort of addicted to these poisons. And what it really changes everything about what we do and how we make decisions. Because in the space of hierarchies, people make many decisions based on coercion, based on who their boss is, not based on what their heart tells them to do. And so this is sort of a call to anybody who exists in a hierarchy right now. It's not that hierarchies are always bad. It's just that they should be constant. People and power should be shifting around constantly. So if you're in a hierarchical organization, especially if there's a pay hierarchy, like, ask why. What is that serving? Could you be serving the world better without it? And then, okay, so wealth accumulation. This is the other thing. And Monbiot's lecture talked about the need for private sufficiency. But there's also the slippery slope here of, if people are asking themselves, what do I need? What is enough for me to be sufficient? A lot of times people have to plan out their entire future until they're dead, and sometimes until their children are dead, to think, okay, I need to amass maybe $1 million or $2 million to take care of me, and then that'll be sufficient. So it drives all ranges of accumulation, but it's also this kind of dissonant, icky feeling of, if you believe that people need to save for retirement, you're actually just sweeping aside half of society, that half of society that just doesn't have savings. Like, what are they going to do? So I've started to just question, like, how much accumulation is okay? Like, do we need to be the person on the left that amasses a pile of wealth in order to feel like we have what's sufficient, while other people are not even able to pay for groceries? Or what if we find something in the middle? And that there's me in the middle, looking way cooler than the person on the left, and my sort of shoulder bag. I think I'm aiming to have about a 6-month cushion of savings in my life. Because I'm going to trust that the world that we're creating right now is going to create flow. That in moments where I need resources, we've created the community and the social infrastructure such that resources will flow toward me. We created them as a commons, all of these land projects, but we're also advocating that the state, the government provide more for people. And so I'm going to be that person one day that does a GoFundMe to help cover my rent if need be, if I haven't given myself enough of a cushion. Now, this is not safe for everybody. Like I have white privilege, and in many ways, like I don't feel super worried about my job security or other things, but society has not been as good to other people. But
I'm going to have to ask
this
if
is,
you would mind kind of wrapping up for us, Janelle,
yeah,
because I've got a
sure.
ton of questions. Yeah.
All right, will do. Anyway, so basically this is what I'm doing. I'm immersing myself in the solidarity economy, jumping into the flow, throwing my resources into the flow. I encourage you to do that too. I think it's a more joyful way to be. And that's why, so you could see this morning I gave $500 to Blackyard. It's a lot of money for me because I only make $65,000 a year, but I didn't need that $5,000 or that $500 this month. It's not charity. It's if I've decided I don't want to accumulate, then it's like I need someone to do me the favor of getting this money out of my hands and do something more beautiful with it. So it's just flow. So here's the last piece is let's stop suffering in this isolation and this loneliness of feeling like we need to protect our power structures and protect our accumulation and create belonging and liberation by just trusting and letting things flow. Thanks for letting me go a little over, and you'll see that there's a bunch of resources in the slides.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Janelle. Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Çaca. I'm just antsy here because there's so many questions that are coming in. I think that some of them are going to give all of you a chance to clarify not only some of the specifics about your projects, but also there seem to be questions that are to indicate there's some confusion about things like community land trust in general. So I want to get to them, but I did want to start because early on there was a question for Çaca that was, could you give some examples of what you would, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, we said we're going to share some of our own questions, but I'm going to really sort of try to mine some of these that are coming from the folks in attendance. Could you give, Çaca, some examples of what would be an acceptable gift of land?
I actually wrote an answer to that, but I suppose I didn't send it correctly. I'm just going to read to you all what it is that I wrote because this is a thought-provoking space, right? In an ideal world, an acceptable land gift is an offering by a community or an individual that seeks to undo violence, undo violent policies, unravel violent practices, tell the truth, or make kin. So this would be a project that someone would present not with loads of stipulations or attached strings, but with the idea that like, I want to do this, I want to offer this up because I am committed to the work of return, not just return of land, but return of kin. I'm committed to undoing the disembodiment of belonging. You know, I want to reinvest in belonging. I'll post that written bit in the chat though.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Here's one I think that throw it out there maybe for everyone. What do each of you find is the biggest barrier to elected leaders supporting and investing in expanding community land trusts? How important is it to get elected leaders promoting community land trusts actively and not just, in parentheses, not just coming to the ribbon cuttings?
Yep.
So, okay, I've got the yep. So is that Tony?
Yeah. You folks on this webinar, I can't see all of you, but I get antsy when I get questions like this because the response to that question, great question. I think the first piece is educating these elected officials. I come across so many people that don't have any idea what a community land trust is or what it can do. It blows my mind. And so you got to hit them with the CLT 101 knowledge. What the heck is a CLT and what can it do? Right? And then as elected officials, you got to get them to leverage those powers within that elected official role to make sure that the voice of the people is being elevated up to the city level and that the city is allocating funds to support building affordable housing, preferably in a model like a CLT, right? That there's language in projects that pushes towards community benefits, fair hiring practices, fair wages, right? And why not entertain what a community land trust model could possibly do for a project? But my initial response to that question is you got to educate folks. I'm blown away at the fact that folks just don't have the knowledge on how this stuff works, which is something that we try to push here in Dudley is We educate the people on the ground, which I think is the first and foremost. We got to educate the lawyers. We got to educate the bankers. We got to educate the elected officials. You got to drop knowledge on folks. And sometimes there's a lack of education that doesn't allow this to get off the ground. It's frustrating, but
Yep.
somebody's got to pick up the baton and hit somebody with it and get them to understand what's going on.
I hear you. And Janelle, how about you? Do you use your cartooning to do that type of sort of broad education? Do you have a specific initiative to reach out to, again, sort of elected officials? Or is that not part of your agenda?
We're starting to do that again. We did in the early years, but we hit a wall because it was that thing of they don't understand what a land trust is. And then we would look around and want to point to really good models. And our land trusts were baby land trusts at the time, some of them. We don't have a Dudley Street in Oakland, but if we did, that would help. And so we shifted our focus to really supporting the growth of these. And I feel like we need to do a little more because policymakers are just starting to come around and see what these are and see how they're valuable. But once we have some really clear models in place, I suspect it'll be a lot easier to advocate for large pools of public funding or even create more public land banks to channel resources to the trust.
Okay, thank you. Let me follow up with you real quick and get to others about, are there particular legal issues, unusual legal issues, or legal issues you're not dealing with now that would be related to gifted land, the acceptance of or use of gifted land, or is it something, would it just be like a normal donation of?
I would say there's nothing too challenging about gifting land, but here's the strange thing is there are people who want to give land to land trusts, but the land trusts are understaffed, overworked. They have getting a lot of outreach right now. So it's incredible to see a land trust turn down a land gift. And so that's what has led some folks, a lot of people are coming to this conclusion simultaneously that we need something like a land bank, maybe not a bank, maybe call it a bridge, basically something that can take title to properties or take purchase options even to properties and hold that until the communities are ready to take ownership. So I think that would help a lot in the land gifting process.
And maybe to Tony and Çaca, well, actually, Tony, I'll ask you first and get to Çaca, but are there situations, given where you are and you're located, obviously in your place-based entity, where gifted land makes any sense to the future of Dudley?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a number of folks over the years. I've had folks come up to me and say, Tony, these are folks that are higher in age and are looking, right, to prepare for what life may be after. And they come up to me and say, Tony, is there a way that we can leave our home with your land trust, right? When our time is said and done, we would love to leave this home in the hands of a community land trust and for the opportunity for the home to give forward opportunity for those that can't afford to rent, for those that can't afford to own. And the nut that I continue to try to crack along with our pro bono attorneys is how do we do that? How do we develop the right legal documentation that would allow that home to be folded into our portfolio and to apply a ground lease to it and to allow our organization to have the level of community control that we infuse in all of our portfolio, right? So that it jives with the mission and values, right? We don't want to just take it, but how do we fold it into the vein that is our work? So I've had folks literally say, we want to hand our home over to you, and they want to gift the land. And so there's some legal hurdles that I want to make sure I get over, because there's the power of the pen, and if we can get that in writing, it gives us much stronger footing to be able to make that argument when things do go down. Yeah. So it's an active thing that we're dealing with, and it's a good problem, right? But yeah, I want to do it right.
Yeah, but you would be supportive, obviously, of this programs that are gifting and particularly to organizations like yours. Yeah.
Look, brother, if we can remove it from the speculative market, yep, right, and help the folks that really need it, I'm all in.
Absolutely, I appreciate it. And Çaca, acceptability. So let's say you've got an acceptable gift that's given to you. Are there capacity issues with your organization in terms of being able to sort of, again, issues have been raised by both, I think, Janelle and Tony. Would you be able to sort of have accommodate a program that would be able to accept gifted land? And let me piggyback that by saying, if you did, how could you envision using that land? It's probably a kind of a wide open question, but I'll throw it to you anyway.
I'll take it. So we're small. There's only 3 of us currently. We have a great deal of support there. We have a number of persons who volunteer, and we have like great support staff in terms of attorneys and folks who are helping us do magical things that I know nothing about, right? But we do have a process. It takes time. We have not turned away gifts yet, but it takes time because we're working with Indigenous communities. So we're going to Indigenous communities in consultation, building relationships, asking questions around if this land comes here, how would you like this land to be used? You know, what conversations do we need to have? Who do we need to bring to that space? How long might this take? What remediation is required, right? What needs to be restored here? So our work takes time. And that's really all it is that we ask, is for people to be willing to share that time and that growth with us.
Great. Thank you.
Greg,
Yeah.
just quickly to add
Sure.
to Saka's point, right? I totally agree, right? Bandwidth and capacity is always a challenge for us in this nonprofit world. You know, I'm one of 3 to run this land trust that I'm talking to you folks about. Of course, I'm showing off all the successes, right? But we need to have a whole nother meeting to understand the failures, right? To help us lead to these successes. It isn't all roses, right? But it's a matter of time. I agree with Saka. We have these conversations, and Lord knows I'd love to unpack this yesterday, right? And fold it in. We get offers all the time. The city wants to engage with us on parcels of land. And I've got to say, hold on a second. I don't have the funding. I don't have my ducks in a row to be able to jump on a parcel of land to develop and build the affordable housing that is in such demand. I'd love to be in that place, but this stuff takes time. And so the more that we can collaborate, right, and ultimately build a resource of funds, that's the stuff that, you know, the nut we continue to try to crack in this world to get these things off the ground.
Can I ask all 3 of you, and this sort of come up in a number of questions here, but, and it gets back to that first question about the difficulty in getting, I mean, the first question was directed toward leaders, but I think maybe even the public in general, an understanding of what a community land trust is. Is it because it's just the current economic context makes it difficult for people to sort of get their arms or around it? I'm just sort of throwing that out because it obviously, we all need to understand that if we are going to develop sort of educational programs and get to some of these officials, we've got to figure out what is it that, where is that blockage? And I kind of throw it out to any, you're right there now, Tony, maybe if you want to start that, but I do think it is an issue, right?
It is an issue, Mr. Watson. It's a lack of education, right? We get folks, homeowners on our land trust. We put them through like a ringer of orientation to understand what a community land trust is. We educate them because folks come in with a lot of skepticism. I get homeowners that are like, but right, I'm buying this house, but it belongs to Dudley and I don't really own my house, although I'm living in it. And you say, no, right? That's why I show that ABC model picture at the beginning. We own the land. You, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, the house is yours. We simply strike a covenant between the two, which is the ground lease that says you're leasing this land out for the next 99 years. It's yours. There's restrictive language in the ground lease, right? That prevents a homeowner from adding, you know, I joke around with folks and I use this exaggerated example. There's language in the ground lease that says, right, Mr. or Mrs. Homeowner, you can't come up to me and say, Tony, I want to add a 24 karat gold, you know, underground pool in my backyard. Well, chances are when I bring that to the board for approval, they're going to frown upon it because it's going to blow the appraisal value of the property out of the water and now not make it affordable for the next family in case you decide to sell your home. And so there are restrictions, but in an effort to preserve the affordability of the property. So education, I go back to education and helping folks understand how this works. And once you break it down, it really helps folks understand how you can help them build wealth and equity through home ownership, although there are some restrictions because of the land trust model. But you've got to break it all down and eliminate the right the confusion and eliminate the doubt that exists in the monetary opportunity of home ownership. In particular, right? We haven't even touched on commercial. We haven't touched on the agricultural agenda, but
That's right. That's
I'm
right.
gonna let my colleagues chime in.
So let me ask, and following up on that, maybe for Çaca, how difficult is it to? It's part of the educational process, and because you were pointing to some of the problems or the issues surrounding the current system. So it seems to me what we have been talking about is has to be part of that educational process, the flaws and the history. When we started the whole conversation talking about land stolen from indigenous peoples, first people. So I mean, there's a history there, but how do you do that in a way that doesn't lead to the shutting down of folks who just turn away from that? Can you speak to that? And I'd like to ask Janelle the same question.
Are you going to ask me a question like that?
Because you're a smart guy, and I know.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to it. I can speak to it. I think that it is a great deal of education. It's a great deal of patience. It also requires, I think it requires a capacity built over time. You have to be a person who's willing to come to a space, recognize that there's a great deal of trauma, that there's a great deal of pain and a great deal of anger, and it can be misplaced and misdirected. And sometimes people get short, sometimes they're very lengthy. And you sit with them and tease out the bits and pieces. It's a process, like there's no one who has caused injury has not been injured. So all who are injured and cause injury need to be held, right? Again, emphasizing the belonging. But yes, education is a big part of it. I think that perhaps 85% of my job is education around some of these matters.
Thanks. Janelle?
There's so many things I want to comment on. I think the most successful projects right now are the ones where people are spending a lot of time in community, getting to know each other, creating empathy for each other. And, part of what's going to make this work ultimately is if people know that there might be land or housing for them, that there might be gifts to come or public acquisitions, land trust acquisitions, communities can start to form throughout our cities. We have an organization locally that helped found East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. It's called the People of Color Sustainable Housing Network. But one of the things they've done is just bring together small groups of people who would start envisioning what would it look like for them to build community together. So it's like you create the community and the relationships, and then when land becomes available, then it's also going to address the capacity issue. Is it's not all on the land trust or the land cooperatives to take it and figure out what to do with it. There's existing communities who are ready to receive. But yeah, I think anybody who's spent any time on land, you develop affection for it, and it's hard to give it up, and it's hard to just sever your relationship to it. And some of that affection comes with knowledge that you can pass on to subsequent groups. And so just learning to be in right relationship and understanding the histories of oppression at play and trauma feels very important.
Yeah. Thanks. There are a lot of questions, and at first blush, you might think this is only directed at Tony, but there are a lot of questions about eminent domain. And obviously it played a very important role in the success of Dudley Street and being able to acquire land. But I guess a lot of these questions are sort of geared towards, is that at all replicable? I mean, and one of the questions here is does DNI see itself playing a role in trying to convince, once again, political leaders to use that power to, once again, with the pressures on land these days increasing, or do we use the example of Dudley Street and DNI that got the power and then shows what you do when communities are empowered with the land, but may have to, I'm not trying to answer the question, but may have to look for other ways and options because well, let me ask the question first. Again, how replicable do you think that the model of eminent domain is? And I'll just throw it out there, that part to Tony, but then the other question is, are options like land gifting perhaps other options that we need to be looking at that might be more palatable to folks. And maybe just answering the question, Tony, you might want to give just if you could, a snapshot of what it took for DS&I and DNI to get that power from, and who was about the city of Boston and that sort of thing.
Well, Mr. Watson, I could hand it back to you, being one of my powerful predecessors that helped blaze this trail that I'm on today. So, you know, it's always a pleasure working with you, brother. In regards to eminent domain, right? It's a word that I don't want to give as much bold or underlining to, right? Eminent domain through Dudley, a lot of folks are like, oh, well, Dudley's special because they got eminent domain. At the time when Dudley Street was granted the eminent domain to take over these parcels of land, it was during a time where Mayor Flynn, who was mayor at the time, and his administration were of a very strong mindset that lent itself towards urban renewal at the time. And Dudley used eminent domain over the years as a poking stick. It used eminent domain as a poking stick. We didn't outright take things. We used the eminent domain power as a poking stick to reach out to owners of land and saying, hey, right? We had gotten a $2 million grant from a foundation here in Boston that we used that money towards buying these parcels of land. So we reach out to owners and say, hey, if you haven't responded to our calls, so here's a letter and a check for what we think the fair cash value of your parcel of land is, because we're taking it and we're going to build housing on it, right? And all of a sudden, absentee owners would raise their hands and say, wait a minute, I'm here. And so we use that as a poking stick to draw out the owners to really have fair conversations to buy these parcels of land fairly, right? Preferably at a lower price. So, and once the owners understood what we're trying to do with it, to then develop the things that I showed you in the slides. So predominantly, we use eminent domain as a poking stick. And I tell all other organizations, you don't have to have eminent domain to be able to revitalize your neighborhood. You know, one thing that I was reading in the questions, which is I absolutely agree with, is somebody wrote people before profit. A friend of the Schumacher Center said CLTs are about people before profit. Amen to that. I tell folks all the time that it's about empowering and educating the people on the ground. And for folks out there that are wondering, how do I initiate one? Educate the people on the ground first. If you don't educate the people at the grassroots level, let me tell you, we're missing the point in this entire conversation. Educating and empowering the people who are on the ground to be able to carry this work is the most important piece to all of this. And, you know, when Janelle mentioned about the hierarchy of how we set things up, for me, if you don't have the people at the base of this movement, you're missing the point. So, but the eminent domain piece was a poking stick that,
I think that's a good point,
that we use.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Let me ask this question here. One off the top of the cities, but could land trusts be set up in rural areas to make farmland available to young farmers, immigrants, women, BIPOC folks, etc., smaller farms to grains and vegetables, and help train prospective young farmers? So I'll throw that out to all of you there. Anybody want to?
I'm just going to say very quickly, yes, these land trusts exist. There are many that exist doing this work. NEFOC is one that we have gifts coming in from city environments and gifts coming in from rural environments. So, I mean, like hybrids also occur, but I want the others to respond to that as well.
We have an organization known as the Urban Farming Institute that we partner with, and they train, right? They train folks on how to be farmers. And there's an opportunity to do this. Absolutely, yes, I agree with Çaca, for whoever asked that question, right? But the only thing that I would tell you who asked the question is make sure that your ducks are lined up in a row, right, as best possible before you try to sink your teeth into executing this amount of work. Folks ask me all the time, Tony, I want to start up a land trust. How do I do that? And I pause them and I'm like, are you ready for that response? Because it's not an ABC response.
Right.
It's an A through Z response, and a number of things have to line up in order to execute a successful project like this. So, but yes, it is possible.
I just dropped into the chat a link to a project that has developed in partnership with Sustainable Economies Law Center called Minnow. And so that's exactly what they're trying to do in California and perhaps beyond. And the other thing that we're seeing a lot of in California, it's not just about farming, it's about re-indigenizing land and recognizing that there's kind of a blur between wildlands and agriculture. That's just sort of like how people stewarded land traditionally is in relationship to it, taking care of it, being fed by it in this reciprocal relationship. And so a lot of our clients are basically trying to re-indigenize land as a way to both conserve it and feed themselves. Melissa Nelson just had an article published by Sierra Club about why we need to re-indigenize land. So it's great to also see a more mainstream organization talking about that.
And while I have you there, is a question that may, or I'm going to assume it's one that may be directed to you. Can any of you folks share insights or public policy recommendations about title insurance? It seems to me like this could be an obstacle, particularly when properties being conveyed to the CLT are from the land bank or foreclosed properties.
Interesting. Well, we just had a teach-in internally called Do It Yourself Title Searches to just learn. A lot of what title companies do is just research the title and make sure there's nothing that's going to be problematic about it. But we're trying to question every little part of the real estate industry and what makes transfers so expensive. And title insurance might be one of those things that we just need to question. But cities can play a role too. A lot of times title is clouded by liens as a result of non-payment of property taxes or garbage fees or something. When transferring that land to land trust, those things should be forgiven by the cities, I think. And we're also looking at ways to reduce in Oakland some of the permit fees, like building and zoning permit related fees for properties. So just, it's like, if this land is moving to the community, like we need to give it clear space to do what the community is going to do with it.
Thank you. Here's one just basic, again, sort of question, a fundamental question, but it's on folks' minds. And the question is, can you speak about the difference between a conservation land trust and a community land trust?
Okay, yeah, I can speak to that. So a conservation land trust is a land trust primarily set up to conserve land. It typically has a board and a staff. Like any other nonprofit. A community land trust is one. I mean, we're a bit of a hybrid, so I'm playing with a number of different things here, but a community land trust typically is a land trust set up to develop not affordable housing, but like long-term security of residency and other different uses. You know, you can develop spaces upon the leases there, but the boards are unique in that members of the board come from the community or are representative of the persons who are utilizing, working, residing on the properties owned by that trust.
Thanks. Thank you.
And
I didn't allow you folks to question each other, and we are getting toward the end. I just wonder if any of you have a burning question for one of your co-panelists that you'd like to raise. And not putting you on the spot.
I'm good. I'm happy to keep taking questions from our attendees.
Yeah.
I could question our panelists, but I want to hear from the people.
All right. All right. There are again some other sort of basic questions. And again, I'm looking through here. We've got a number of eminent domain. That was the conservation. You did answer the one about how they got eminent domain. I think as I'm doing this, I am going to direct people who are watching this from, since we are a place-based organization, that is the Schumacher Center, that they should, if they're not aware of the Berkshire Community Land Trust, they should absolutely educate themselves on what's happening sort of in their own backyard. Can I just pose then like a question? And I don't know how many of you are and out there are familiar that Senator Cory Booker and others have recently filed a bill called the Justice for Black Farmers Act that would, among other things, convey up to 160 acres of land to eligible Black individuals at no cost. The goal would be to convey no less than 20,000 land grants each year from 2021 through 2030. And they define an eligible Black individual as anyone, as being, well, not anyone, being born in the United States, at least 21 years of age, previously identified as Black or African American, and at least 1%, one parent of African ancestry. And the bill, I think, was filed last week. And it is obviously huge in its scope. There's also parts of it that would contribute to the research at historically Black colleges and universities. But my question as we wrap up is just first blush, that there's much more to it, but I'd be interested in your reactions to this and what that might impact. That, I mean, that would constitute some huge gifts. I mean, to individuals, and obviously how that could impact the movement. There are no stipulations about land trust. And I know that there have been discussions about, is there, and I guess what I'm asking now as we get toward the end is it important if that, let's just hope, I mean, cross our fingers that could happen, right? I mean, there's some gaps in there, as I pointed out earlier, in terms of land ownership and what's in the history of land ownership. But what are the opportunities to talk about community land trust? Let's assume that that's going to happen before it happens. And what do you feel might be the responsibility, and what other reactions you might have? So I'm just going to throw that out to you.
Well, I'll speak of a group that we have here in Boston, Greg. And a few years ago, we created the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network, right? And we built this coalition because there were multiple neighborhoods that were wondering, how do we scale up to become a community land trust similar to Dudley? That given that we were fortunate to have the track record that we have in the number of years that we've been doing it. So we created this Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network, and we convene monthly to share best practices and figure out, right, how other neighborhoods can begin to scale up and do similar things to what Dudley has done. And although there have been folks that are saying, I don't want 1 million CLTs popping up all over the city. And so there's this pro and there's this con to the community land trust model popping up all over. But we're trying to figure out how we create a central base, right? That's a repository of all of these different neighborhoods with a funding, hopefully, that we're still working on, that we can then, right, put into different pockets of the city to begin to push that scale on wherever folks may be in different parts of the world. That's one way, right, to really replicate the model without, I don't know, some folks think it's an oversaturation to have 1 million CLTs all throughout. But if you somehow centralize it and control it, where there's funding that is appropriately getting to the right hands, we can still achieve these successes that we're talking about on this call.
Anybody else any comments?
I think it's super exciting. And I also worry about any model that continues to lift up individual ownership of land, given that land is really a finite resource in the United States, and it's already become so concentrated. And it's sort of reminiscent of the allotment system, where so much of Indigenous owned land was lost because of the financial pressures that forced Indigenous people to sell off individually owned parcels. And so I think reparations should perhaps ensure that land is stabilized for the community benefit, and maybe take place as a form of in the form of dollars, reparation in the form of dollars.
Yeah, well, it's worth following and monitoring, and then figuring out if there is a role for there to be some really rubbed up education around community land trust and other forms of shared ownership, because it would be sort of a shame to miss an opportunity if something like that were to happen. Lots of other questions that are asking, about direct contact of your slide presentations and others. We'll be able to make sure that you get those, and we can tell folks, if you can make those available, how they can get to those. And with that, I guess what I want to do is just thank you all for a wonderful roundtable. And you can, again, I hope that you've been able to scan some of these questions. I probably didn't do them justice. Some of them overlap, but you've generated a lot of interest and excitement, and your work inspires, and I trust you will continue to inspire into the future. So thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Çaca, Tony, Greg.
Thank you. Be
Appreciate
safe,
you
everyone.
both. Thank you for the
Yeah,
question.
take care.